Listen closely because you need to completely deprogram your mind from the Hollywood illusions that have been fed to the masses for decades. A real medieval tavern was never that cozy, warm sanctuary with a cheerful bartender that the movies want you to believe in. What we are actually dealing with here is a literal pit of despair, a sweating, putrid, suffocating hellhole where the floor beneath your boots squishes with the filth of 1,000 sins. The acrid smoke in the air doesn't just sting, it claws at your lungs like a physical manifestation of the darkness, while every single soul in the room is calculating if you are worth the price of betrayal. In this den of iniquity, the gambling dice never stop rattling like dry bones, and the blades hidden in the shadows never sleep waiting for the moment to strike. Make no mistake, the pestilence floating through this stagnant air is a silent killer that will claim more lives tonight than any steel sword ever could. This is the very breeding ground where mighty empires begin to rot from the inside out over spilled spirits. This is the realm where vast fortunes evaporate between the setting of the sun and the breaking of the dawn, where bodies grow cold in the dark corners, and not a single person dares to ask the hard questions. If you walk through those doors thinking this was just a casual spot to grab a drink, you have already fallen into the first trap of the enemy and made a fatal error in judgment. But tonight, friends, we are kicking that door wide open to expose the truth, and we are standing our ground in this darkness until the light of day finally exposes what has been hidden. You are going to inhale the stench of reality, smelling exactly what these chambers of hopelessness smelled like, and you're going to taste the vile brew that kept the peasantry barely alive while it slowly decayed their temples from the inside. You are about to encounter the entities that ruled these shadows, the tavern keepers who operated like spiritual parasites, bleeding every last copper coin from desperate broken men. We will look at the soldiers who had abandoned all hope, and the corrupt priests concealing sins far darker and more twisted than the very confessionals they preached from on Sunday mornings. We will see the women who were ensnared in a vicious cycle, trapped in a dehumanizing game that they never consented to play in the first place. And we will face the cutthroats, the men with seared consciences who could empty your pockets and slice your throat open before you even finish speaking your piece. You are going to sit at the tables where a single roll of the dice decimated entire family bloodlines. You are going to stand right in the epicenter of this chaos and witness how quickly one wrong word can twist a moment of laughter into a brutal act of murder. And when the morning finally pierces through those grime-covered windows, you are going to have to tally up the body count of the fallen. Because the spiritual reality is this: everyone who enters a place of such darkness pays a heavy price, and I mean absolutely everyone. Before we cross that threshold together and unveil this history, go ahead and drop your city and country in the comments below. I need to know where the remnants are watching from right now. If this deep dive into the hidden history stirs something in your spirit the way it absolutely should, make sure to subscribe immediately to help us keep excavating the truth from the lies. You have tuned into the source of real revelation, and I tell you, there is no other platform on earth digging into the roots of this darkness like we are today. You push that heavy door open, and the first thing that assaults your senses is not the noise of the crowd. It is the smell, a stench that slams into your face like a brick wall of judgment. It is hot, wet, and oppressive. A mix of old sweat, toxic smoke, sour brew, and something rotting deep underneath it all. It fills your lungs so thickly you feel like you could literally chew on the corruption. Your eyes immediately start to burn from the fumes, and your chest tightens up as if the very atmosphere is trying to reject you. For a split second, your instinct screams at you to spin around and march right back out into the freezing, garbage-filled streets. But you have been journeying since sunrise, and your physical vessel is screaming for rest. You are starving, soaked to the bone, and spiritually exhausted, so you cross the threshold and step inside, where the ceiling is so low it practically sits on top of your head. You could reach up and scrape your knuckles against those blackened beams timber that decades of unholy smoke have turned the color of ancient dry bones. Hanging from those rafters, you see dried meats, bundles of strange herbs, ropes of onions, and shadowy shapes that you honestly pray you never have to identify clearly with the naked eye. Every single surface in this place is slick with an unknown substance, and every shadow seems to harbor something far worse than what you can see. You hear heavy boots stomping on the floor, benches scraping against the wood, someone cackling with a laughter that is too loud and lasts too long, and a man hacking up his lungs like he is meeting his maker right there in his seat. A feral dog snarls somewhere in the obscuring darkness, while someone else gags in the corner. Look at the floor, folks, because that is not a floor in the modern sense. In most of these dens, it is nothing but packed earth covered with old rushes, dead grass thrown down simply to soak up whatever filth spills out of the cups or the patrons. Now, the owners are technically supposed to swap those rushes out regularly, but let's be real, they never do. And that straw sits there rotting for weeks or even months at a time. Wine, sweat, vomit, and grease all sink deep into that mat and fester. We are talking about dead vermin bones from meals eaten last week and scraps of bread that have turned as hard as stone. There are broken teeth that someone spit out after a brawl, and as your boot sinks into a soft spot, you feel it crunch through something dry and unrecognizable. Now, the upscale places might have wooden boards, which sounds cleaner, but do not be deceived. Those planks are black with ancient stains that nobody can identify anymore. You see the marks of violence everywhere, knife gouges in the tables, and deep slashes on the floor where conflicts ended in an ugly, bloody mess. There are deep cracks where heavy chairs were smashed over human skulls, and where tankards missed their target and buried themselves deep into the timber instead. If you look closely with discernment, you can still see the dried blood ingrained into the wood grain, a testimony to the violence of the past. Nobody ever scrubbed it properly, and the walls are no better. Most of these structures are wattle and daub, just thin branches woven together and smeared over with mud, straw, and animal dung. It might block the wind, but it does absolutely nothing to stop the dampness from seeping into your bones. In the winter, water beads up inside and runs down the walls like the building itself is sweating in fear, and in the summer those walls bake and radiate the heat right back at you like an oven. Layers of grease and soot coat everything in sight. What used to be a pale brown color is now a slick, oily black that reflects the darkness of the times. Here and there, someone made a futile attempt to make it look civilized, maybe hanging a rough painting of a saint watching over the room in silent judgment. You might see a panel depicting some king on a high horse or a crude shield bearing the image of a lion or a cross trying to invoke some authority. But in the rougher joints, if the owner has no fear of what the church thinks, you might see other pictures. Bodies tangled in sin, drinking games, and dirty jokes scratched into the wood where no priest would ever dare to look. Let me tell you, in a place as dark as this, light is not just a convenience. It is a matter of pure survival. Picture a roaring inferno dominating the center of the room, or perhaps a massive hearth raging against the back wall like a trapped beast. The flames cast violent splashes of orange and blood red across everyone's features, carving out deep, jagged shadows that seem to twist and morph with every slight movement. Under that flickering, unstable glow, a simple smile can look deceptive. When a man grins in that light, it looks less like a friendly gesture and more like a predator baring its fangs for the kill. Even an elderly woman squinting through the gloom suddenly takes on a grotesque appearance, looking like a creature straight out of your worst nightmares. But make no mistake that fire is the lifeblood of the entire establishment. It is the only thing heating the stew and drying out the sodden cloaks of travelers. It is the only barrier standing between you and freezing to death when the brutal winter winds start to bite. But at the same time, it is a silent killer just waiting for the right moment to strike. All it takes is one stray ember finding its way into the dry thatch, and the entire building transforms into a flaming mass grave in seconds. You have got candles flickering weakly on the tables and oil lamps sputtering on the shelves fighting a losing battle. Their pathetic light barely makes a dent in the encroaching darkness. To make matters worse, the tallow candles are crafted from rendered animal fat, pumping out a thick, greasy smoke that mingles with every other foul scent choking the air. There is no proper ventilation or chimney system in a place like this. The smoke just climbs up, slams against the ceiling, and spreads out like a suffocating blanket of toxic fog. Eventually, it might find a way to leak out through the cracks in the roof or a crude hole hacked into the thatch. But until that happens, every single person in the room is breathing it in deep. Newcomers walk in and immediately start gagging on the fumes. But the regulars, they are so conditioned, they do not even notice it anymore. You just stand there, blinking eyes stinging and watering, waiting for the shadowy shapes to separate themselves from the gloom. Slowly the faces start to materialize out of the haze. Over at one table, you will see the merchants huddled together, leaning in close and speaking in rapid-fire bursts. You can tell immediately that their status is higher than the rest of the rabble. They are wearing dyed fabrics, sporting fur-lined collars, and carrying purses fat enough to put a target on their backs. One hand is always wrapped tight around their ale cup, while the other hand never, and I mean never, strays far from their money. Closer to the fire, you have got the soldiers in threadbare cloaks hunched over their drinks like coiled springs. The mud from the long road is still caked thick on their boots. One of them bears a jagged scar across his face, the wound so fresh and raw that the skin is still angry and pink. Their blades are never out of reach, resting against the bench just inches away. They might laugh when something strikes a nerve, but the second anyone steps inside their personal bubble, they go dead silent. To the untrained eye, they look relaxed, maybe even checked out. They are not. They are scanning the room, cataloging every potential threat, every exit, and every weakness they can exploit. Pushed up against the far walls, the pilgrims cluster together for safety, trying to find strength in numbers. Their cloaks are festooned with badges, from holy sites, seashells, from distant shrines, and cheap tin tokens, stamped with the images of saints they are hoping will protect them. Some of them are muttering prayers and white-knuckling their rosaries. Others have clearly given up on piety for the night, drinking heavily and making eyes at the serving girls passing by. But you need to use some discernment here. Not everyone flashing those holy badges earned them through honest pilgrimage. Then you have the tradesmen sitting in their own tight-knit cliques. You see a blacksmith with hands permanently scarred by burns. Then there is a tanner whose pungent aroma announces his line of work long before he ever speaks a word. There is a weaver with ink-stained fingers from tallying up his orders. They are constantly arguing about guild politics, contracts that got delayed, and payments that were promised but never materialized. Their voices rise and fall in a rhythmic cadence, syncing up perfectly with the clinking of their cups against the wood. And then you have the fixtures, the people who look like they literally grew out of the furniture and have been there since the beginning of time. These are the locals with faces carved out of granite by the years' missing teeth and eyes that have watched famine, plague, and war roll through town just like the weather. When they laugh, there is zero warmth behind it. These folks live right next door to death, and they stopped being surprised by the horror of it a long time ago. Holding this chaotic ecosystem together by sheer force of will is the tavern keeper. He is usually a massive individual with arms thickened from years of hauling heavy barrels and physically tossing out anyone who dares to cross him. His apron is a history book of 100 spilled meals and fights. His shirt hangs open and his skin glistens with sweat from standing next to that inferno since high noon. He knows every single face in the crowd. He remembers who paid up, who is in debt, who causes trouble but spends enough cash to be tolerated, and who starts brawls without ever buying a drop. His word inside these four walls carries more weight and authority than any local bailiff or magistrate out on the street. He is the judge, jury, and executioner on who gets served, who gets turned away at the door, and who gets dragged outside and dumped face first into the mud. If it suits his agenda, he decides which crimes get reported to the authorities and what incidents simply vanish beneath a fresh layer of floor rushes, never to be spoken of again. If he has a wife, do not be fooled. She is likely running half this operation herself. She is handling the cooking, she is counting every coin, and she is watching that door like a hawk. She expertly swats away drunk hands reaching where they have no business going. A wooden spoon in her grip is a weapon that can crack ribs hard enough to send a very clear message. She observes far more than she speaks, gathering intel while everyone else is running their mouths. She knows exactly who is cheating whom, who is planning to skip town in the middle of the night, who got paid today, and who is one bad night away from doing something desperate. Honestly, she is the one you should actually be afraid of. To an outsider, this room looks like a lawless pit, but it is not chaos. It operates on a set of unwritten rules that are older than any king's decree. In here, your royal bloodline means nothing compared to your behavior. A poor man who pays his debts and keeps his mouth shut will always find a seat at the table. Conversely, a wealthy man who insults the wrong person will be carried out feet first in a box. Every single night, the social hierarchy gets renegotiated through money, alcohol fists, and fear. But before you ever even set foot in a place like this, you have to make a critical decision about which door you are going to push open. Because in this medieval landscape, not every drinking hole is created equal, and discernment is key to survival. Choose the wrong spot and you might end up sleeping in a bed, crawling with parasites paying 3 times the actual price, or waking up in a dark alley with your skull cracked open. At the top of the food chain sits the inn. This is the closest thing you will find to legitimate lodging. It is built for travelers, offering food, drink, a stable for your horse, and a space actually intended for sleeping. The highest quality ones are sturdy stone buildings with a second floor, and if you are lucky, maybe even a courtyard for security. You will find them strategically placed near city gates, at major river crossings, and along the main highways that everyone is forced to travel. Step inside a proper inn, and you will notice the shift in atmosphere immediately. It is a different world entirely. You look at the structures built by the hands of men, and they project an image of stability. A sturdier construction designed to deceive the eye. Hanging outside there is always a sign. Maybe it depicts a beast, maybe a so-called saint. Symbols of the very system that has kept our people in a slumber for centuries. The crowd gathering here appears elevated, dressed in the finer garments of this world, mimicking the prosperity of Babylon in the year 2026. These are the merchants of the earth, the couriers running messages for the elite, and pilgrims carrying bags of silver and gold. You look around and you see the trappings of wealth, decent tableware instead of wooden bowls. In those rare, exclusive spots, you might even catch the glint of actual glass in the windows, a luxury that screams separation of class. But let me tell you that comfort is nothing but a shallow illusion. Privacy, the way we understand it in our spirit, is non-existent in these Gentile kingdoms. You are handing over your hard-earned currency not for a sanctuary, but merely for a space to exist. It is a lease on a cage, not a room of your own. Picture this nightmare. You and 12 strangers, people whose spirits you have not tested, forced to share the same bed. One mattress, multiple bodies breathing the same air. If you are walking in wisdom, if you are truly awake, you do not take off your armor. You sleep with your boots strapped on your belt, tightened, and your money pressed right against your skin because the enemy never sleeps. If you lack discernment, if you let your guard down for even 1 second in this beast system, you will wake up stripped of your blessings. You will find yourself missing the very things you need to survive in this wilderness. And what are you actually sleeping on? These beds are nothing but wooden frames barely held together by rope or leather straps. A precarious foundation. On top sits a heavy sack stuffed with straw or feathers or whatever cheap material the system could scavenge that year to cut costs while charging you a premium. It is filthy family. That bedding is almost never changed, accumulating the sins and the filth of every traveler before you. It is a breeding ground for vermin. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs are waiting there to feast on your blood all night long, draining your energy, just like the spiritual parasites in high places. There is no remedy provided by the establishment to kill these pests. No one has the means or the desire to wash properly. It is a state of perpetual uncleanness, physical and spiritual, that pervades the entire atmosphere. You lie there and you scratch, you suffer through the torment, or you finally realize the game is rigged and you give up, choosing to sleep on the hard floor. The noise is relentless, a constant chaotic frequency. Men are snoring like dying animals, their spirits restless even in sleep. Someone is over there talking in tongues or mumbling secrets in his dreams. Another soul is coughing so violently, you start to wonder if he will even make it to see the morning sunrise. The air is thick with the stench of unwashed bodies piled together, a collective misery. You smell the damp wool, the rot of a society that has forgotten how to cleanse itself. In the corner stands the chamber pot that nobody bothered to empty, a symbol of the negligence of this world. But for most travelers navigating these dangerous roads, this wretched conditions are still preferred over sleeping outside, where the thieves, the wolves, and the two-legged beasts are hunting for prey to devour. Now, if you go below the inn, you find the tavern. This is where the spirits, literal and liquid, flow freely. The purpose here is wine, not the common drink of the masses. They want to intoxicate you with the luxury of the nations. We are talking about the expensive imported poison that marks you as a person of status in this matrix. Wine in medieval Europe, much like the luxury brands of today, is all about signaling your rank in the hierarchy. It is a tool of division. This wine travels from far distances, from the vineyards of France, the valleys of Germany, and the southern lands where the sun actually blesses the soil. It comes from the places that control the economy, brought in to seduce the minds of the people in the north. Transporting this commodity to a northern city involves ships' heavy taxes, middlemen taking their cut, and bribes paid to officials. All of that corruption makes it expensive. Inside a wine tavern, you hear the confusion of tongues, foreign accents, plotting, and scheming. You look around and see careful clothing garments chosen to display wealth and power. The men sitting here might be wealthy, but in the eyes of the hungry and the desperate, that just makes them prime targets for judgment and robbery. They are drinking from cups that might be pewter or even silver, flaunting their riches. They sit there arguing about shipping costs, complaining about royal taxes, and keeping a strict ledger of who owes what to whom. It is the spirit of mammon on full display. Record keeping is their religion. Every barrel is counted, every seal is checked for tampering, and every volume is measured with precision. Because wine is valuable liquid currency, it is watched with the eyes of a hawk. They guard their wealth better than they guard their souls. Even the city officials, the agents of the state, worry about fraud. They know that tavern keepers are always tempted by greed to water down the good stuff, to dilute the truth with lies just to make an extra coin. They will blend the cheap swill with the expensive vintage or fake entire barrels with substances that should never touch a human mouth. It is the sorcery of the marketplace, mixing the holy with the profane to deceive the consumer. But getting caught in this deception brings public shame, a judgment that we need to see more of in 2026. We are talking stocks pillories and the ruined barrel poured over your head while the crowd cheers for justice. It is a public purging of the wicked. To stop these scams, the customer has the right to demand proof. If a buyer has doubts, and you should always have doubts in this system, he can demand to see the actual barrel in the cellar. You have to inspect the fruit yourself. That is the reason why many of these taverns have deep, cool rooms underground lined with casks. They have to hide the source deep within the earth to preserve it, or perhaps to hide their secrets. Down there, away from the noise and the distraction of the surface world, the real treasure of the house sits quietly aging. Officials known for testing quality might drop by unannounced to taste and announce their verdict in the street. They are the watchmen on the wall for the wine industry. A tavern that receives praise by name thrives and prospers, but one that is condemned publicly dies within the season. It is a cutthroat world where reputation is everything and judgment comes swiftly. Over time, these wine taverns begin to expand their empire. They add food, bread, cheese, stews, trying to cater to every fleshly desire. They start stocking cider or mead, broadening their net to catch more souls. If business is booming, they start renting out sleeping space. Now the lines are blurring. Is this a tavern or an inn? The distinction fades as the commercial beast grows larger and consumes more functions. For the customer trying to survive, these labels matter less than one thing: price. The bottom line always dictates the movement of the people. And at the bottom of the ladder, the humblest place of gathering, sits the alehouse. This is often just someone's private home turned semi-public for the sake of survival. A woman brews more ale than her family needs and sells the rest to the community. It is the original side hustle born out of necessity. She does not have a fancy neon sign. She hangs a branch, a broom, or a simple rag outside her door. That is the signal. No painted images, just a coded message to the neighborhood that knows what to look for. It means fresh ale is here. Ale is the drink of the common people, the Israelites scattered in the four corners. Children drink it. Workers drink it. Even the elders drink it. It is the sustenance of the oppressed. Everyone drinks it because the regular water, the very resource provided by nature, is polluted and can kill you. The system has poisoned the wells. The alehouse is local. It is the community hub where everyone knows everyone. They know your names, your families, your debts, and your deepest secrets. The room is small, intimate. The fire is modest, barely keeping the cold at bay. There are 1 or 2 tables at most, forcing you to sit face to face with your neighbor. But for the street, this humble place is the center of everything. The alewife is not just a server, she is the host and the judge rolled into one. She discerns who enters and who speaks. She gives credit to the people she trusts, showing mercy to the brethren. But she turns away the ones who are all talk, the ones who always promise to pay next week but never deliver. She knows a liar when she sees one. She knows who is beating his wife behind closed doors, who is stealing from his employer, and who plans to skip town without paying what he owes. If you want to understand the spirit of that neighborhood, you talk to her first. She holds the intel. But even these humble places are watched by the law. The eye of the beast is omnipresent. The authorities set prices and quality standards through strict rules like the assize of bread and ale. They tie the cost of ale to the cost of grain, controlling the food supply and the economy with an iron fist. Officials called ale tasters or ale conners wander from place to place sampling what is sold. If they find a weak brew or catch someone charging too much, the punishment follows fast. The system does not tolerate competition or deviation. We are talking stocks, pillories, and ducking stools that drop the offender into freezing water again and again while the crowd howls with laughter. It is a brutal spectacle designed to keep the population in line through fear and humiliation. So you have to make a choice in this life. The path is narrow and the options are few. Do you head for the stone inn, the establishment that looks secure, and pay extra for a bed that is crawling with parasites and demons? Do you buy into the false safety of the high-end system? Do you step into the wine tavern and risk your money among sharp-eyed merchants and professional gamblers who are ready to hustle you out of your last dime? Or do you duck into the cramped alehouse, the underground spot where everyone knows everyone, and you, as a stranger, stand out like a fire in the dark? It is dangerous to be an outsider. Choose wrong and you lose your possessions, your health, and your very life. But even if you choose right, you still face one final question that will determine your destiny in these last days. So what do you actually dare to put in your mouth in a world where the water supply itself is a literal death sentence? That is exactly where we are taking this journey next. You have to understand that behind every single drink sitting on these rough-hewn tables hides a brutal, terrifying truth. In the dark days of medieval Europe, alcohol is not about entertainment or having a good time. It is the thin, desperate line between surviving to see another sunrise and dropping dead before the rooster crows. It is a matter of life and death. You drop your heavy body onto a splintered wooden bench, and before you can even catch your breath, someone asks you the only question that matters in this environment. What are you drinking? Now your modern mind might think the smart answer, the healthy answer, is water. But in this twisted reality, that is the absolute fastest way to punch your ticket to the grave. That river flowing outside. It is not just a river. It is an open sewer where the entire city dumps its filth, its sins, and its rot. You have chamber pots being emptied straight into the flow. Tanners are soaking their chemical-laden hides. Dyers are flushing toxic poisons right into the drinking supply. The butchers let the blood of slaughtered animals run down the gutters and straight into the current. They sink the wells way too close to the burial pits and the cesspools. The rain barrels are not fresh. They grow green with thick slime and they wriggle with insect larvae. Nobody has ever heard the scientific word bacteria yet, but every single person knows one undeniable fact. If you drink that water raw, your insides will tear themselves apart and you will die in agony. That is why the table in front of you is covered with cups, not water jugs. You see ale, wine, cider, mead. These are the drinks that might actually keep you alive in a toxic world. Alcohol is not a guilty pleasure here. It is medicine. It is pure survival mode. Little children drink weak ale. Old grandmothers drink it. The laborers drink it at the crack of dawn at high noon and when the sun goes down. A day without a drink is not a badge of sobriety or honor. It is suicide by ignorance. Most of what you see in an ordinary tavern is going to be ale, but you need to forget what you imagine when I say that word. There is no golden liquid sparkling in a clean, sanitized glass. Medieval ale is thick, it is cloudy, it is warm, and it is full of mysterious things floating in the mug. It is honestly closer to a food source than a beverage. And the story of ale begins out in the fields. The barley is harvested soaked in water until it begins to sprout life and then dried over intense heat. This process turns the starch into sugar, which is the fuel for the fire. The malt gets crushed down and mixed with hot water. That produces a sticky, sweet liquid that they call wort. In a world completely without thermometers or technology, these brewers judge the temperature with their bare hands and years of gut instinct. If it is too hot, the yeast dies. If it is too cold, nothing ferments. And yeast itself is a total mystery to them. Nobody knows it is actually a living organism. There are no foil packets you can buy from a shop. There are no cultures grown in a sterile laboratory. They rely on wild yeasts that drift in from the open air and cling to the old wooden tools like invisible spirits. These spirits invade the wort and start the magical work of converting sugar into alcohol and gas. Sometimes they cooperate with the brewer, sometimes they do not. The result can be smooth and drinkable, or it can be sour enough to make your face twist up. In many regions, people are still using an ancient, potent mixture of herbs called groot. Instead of using hops for preservation, they throw in bog plants, yarrow, heather, or whatever wild vegetation grows nearby. These ingredients change the flavor profile, but they also drastically change the effect on the mind. Some of those plants will calm you down, while others make you twitchy, hostile, and dizzy. Every single household guards its own secret recipe like a vault. The alewife is the woman who usually runs this entire operation. Brewing is not a pastime or a hobby. It is critical survival work. A good alewife earns the loyalty of the village. Her neighbors come back for more. They spread her name like a legend. A bad alewife becomes a target for cruel jokes and severe punishments, because fresh ale does not last like modern beer. Within a few days, it starts going sour and strange. That means the brewing process never stops. Buckets and tubs and barrels sit in every corner at different stages of the cycle. The air in a brewing house hangs heavy with the smell of wet grain and active fermentation. The floors are slick with the mess of industry. The fire is never allowed to go out. The work is hot, sweaty, and endless. Each batch is strictly divided by its strength and potency. The first liquid off the mash is the strongest ale. The later runnings make a weaker drink called small beer, which has barely any kick, but is still safer to drink than the water. Children and hard workers drink this stuff all day long just to stay hydrated. The strong ale gets sold for profit or saved for the occasions that actually matter. Ale is cheaper than wine, but do not think for a second it is free from control. It is watched closely by the authorities. Grain prices determine everything in this economy. When the harvests fail and people start to starve, officials set fixed prices for ale based on what the grain costs. They also demand a minimum strength level. The inspectors arrive without any warning. They taste. They judge. If the ale is found to be weak or overpriced, the punishment follows fast and hard. Men get locked in the stocks for public shaming. Women get strapped into ducking chairs and plunged into freezing water while the entire neighborhood watches and laughs. The crowd absolutely loves it. The message sent by the powers that be is impossible to miss. Cheat your customers, and you become the show. Now, wine is a different world entirely. If ale belongs to the many, wine is the liquid mark of power, religion, and old money. It flows through the veins of the churches and the royal courts and the homes of the wealthy elite. The barrels sitting in this tavern might have crossed dangerous oceans to get here. They might come from southern France, from the valleys of the Rhine, or from Iberian vineyards baked by fire. Every single step of that long journey costs heavy coin. You have to pay the harvesters, the carters, the sailors, the port officials, the tax collectors, and the middlemen who skim off the top at every turn. By the time a barrel reaches the cellar of an English tavern, its contents are worth far more than the same volume of common ale. Wine merchants can become incredibly rich. They build massive networks that stretch across kingdoms. They speak multiple languages. They know exactly which noble family is at war, which tax just doubled, and which harbor is blockaded. Wine is not just a drink for the elite. It is intelligence. It is leverage in a game of power. Step right into the belly of the beast, into the dim light of the modern-day tavern, where the wine of Babylon flows freely from barrel to jug and finally into the cup of the unsuspecting. It comes in every shade of deception: strong, sour, sweet, dark, or pale. There is no single type of poison here, folks. The enemy has a flavor for every lost soul walking through those doors. Now pay attention to the spirit behind the spirits. Some of these wines are crafted to age, festering over time like a generational curse, while others are simple, cheap distractions meant to hook the youth while they are still young and impressionable. But make no mistake, the vessels are compromised. The barrels leak, and the contents inside are spoiling faster than the world situation in 2026. You think you are getting the good stuff, but let me tell you, even what appears to be good wine can turn into vinegar overnight in these end times. Fraud is absolutely everywhere in this system. We are dealing with crooked merchants, spiritual and physical, who water down the quality stock, diluting the truth until it is nothing but a lukewarm mess that the Lord will spew from his mouth. These charlatans blend the cheap with the expensive mixing lies with just enough truth to make it palatable, and then they sell the result as premium revelation. They are artificially coloring the pale, sickly doctrines to look richer and more vibrant, masking the stench of spoiled wine with the honey of prosperity, preaching, and the spices of false comfort. It goes deeper than just a little mixing. Some of these wicked sellers fake entire barrels, concocting a witch's brew of garbage liquids and chemical additives designed to mimic the taste and color of the real thing. It is synthetic, it is artificial, and it is exactly what the global system is feeding the masses to keep them asleep. The city authorities, the so-called watchmen of the secular world, try to keep pace with the corruption, but they are part of the same beast system. You have these quality officials tasting and rating what is sold, announcing prices and origins in the streets like town criers. But can you really trust the regulators when the whole game is rigged? Their word has the power to save or destroy a tavern's reputation in a heartbeat. The merchants caught cheating might face fines and public shame, but that is just a slap on the wrist compared to the judgment coming from the Most High. When the books are opened, no amount of public relations will save them. In the old days, they might end up locked in a pillory, humiliated in the town square, while their own fraudulent wine was poured over their heads. It is a prophetic picture of what is coming. The very lies they peddled will be the instrument of their own destruction, pouring down on them like the bowls of wrath. Their product becomes their punishment, a perfect karmic circle. But despite the danger, the wine still pulls people in. The addiction to the system is strong. For many of these drinkers, lifting that cup is not about the flavor. It is about the ritual of forgetting the darkness rising around them. It is about feeling important for a fleeting moment, a temporary ego boost in a world that strips you of your dignity. It is about imitating the habits of the kings of the earth, the priests and nobles who are drunk on power. The common man drinks to feel like the elite, not realizing he is drinking from the cup of his own enslavement. Then we have to talk about mead. Now, mead is essentially honey water, and yeast sounds simple, right? But do not be deceived by simplicity. Honey is not cheap in this economy. It represents the fat of the land, a resource that is becoming scarce as we move further into the famine cycles of 2026. Think about the labor involved. Bees must be kept, or the honey must be bought from those brave enough to risk the stings and the theft to collect it. This resource is vital. It is needed for medicine, for light in the darkness, and for sweetening the bitter food of affliction. It is a high-value commodity in a collapsing supply chain. That scarcity makes mead a luxury item, something out of reach for the working class. In the northern lands, people associate it with the mighty warriors of old, with great feasts and with moments worth remembering, a stark contrast to the amnesia induced by the cheap swill of the modern age. The brewers take this precious honey, dissolve it in water, heat it up, and let the fermentation process take over. They might add spices, herbs, or fruit to mask the potency, just like the media adds spin to the news cycle. It is all about crafting a narrative that goes down smooth but hits hard. Some of these meads are heavy, strong enough to burn, going down like a fire in your belly, waking you up to the reality of the battle. Others are lighter, sweeter, designed to lull you into a false sense of security while the enemy gathers at the gates. The long-aged meads develop a complexity that you just cannot fake, but aging requires space and patience. Two things the modern world has completely lost. Only a few wealthy households can afford to sit and wait for the harvest, while the rest of the world scrambles for their daily bread. You might stumble across real mead in a respectable tavern on a holy day, or perhaps in a trading city with deep connections to the old roots. But in the poor places, in the outskirts where the forgotten people live, it is rare. It is a relic of a time before the austerity measures kicked in. When it does appear, people treat it with a reverence that borders on idolatry. Then you have cider and perry filling that middle ground in the orchard country. This is the fruit of the earth fermented and given over to the natural processes, a reminder of the seasons we have tried to disconnect from. Where the apple trees cover the hills, at least where they haven't been burned down or bought up by megacorporations, the crushed fruit ferments almost as naturally as grain brews. The apples are pressed, the lifeblood of the fruit is stored in barrels, and nature takes its course. The wild yeasts take over the process. The result can be mild, or it can be strong enough to knock down men who drink ale all day long. It is unpredictable, just like the times we are living in. You think you can handle it, but the spirit of the orchard has a kick that will leave you flat on your back. Perry made from pears follows the exact same path. These drinks taste like the land they come from, bitter, sweet, earthy. In some regions, they appear at every table, a staple of the local culture. But even this connection to the land is being severed by the globalist agenda. In other places, these natural drinks are considered exotic and expensive, priced out of the range of the common man. The supply depends entirely on the season, and as we know, the weather patterns are being manipulated. A good autumn brings plenty, but we are seeing fewer and fewer of those. A bad year brings scarcity, famine, and desperation. Finding real cider or perry on a tavern menu is both a hint of what used to be and a temptation to spend what little you have left. It is a gamble just like everything else in this economy. But listen closely, because all of these drinks share the same fundamental problems. They are unpredictable. Without the controls of the Holy Spirit, or in the physical sense, without controlled yeast strains and accurate measuring tools, you are rolling the dice. Without sealed vessels and proper oversight, every batch is different. One barrel might be smooth and easy to drink, deceiving you into letting your guard down. It is the peace and safety message before the sudden destruction hits. The very next barrel might be harsh and twice as strong, hitting you with a toxicity you were not prepared for. You can misjudge the situation badly and end up far more drunk, far more compromised than you ever planned to be. This is how the trap is sprung. And let's be honest about the sanitation, they are not clean. Boiling the water for ale and mead might kill many threats, but it does not kill them all. The spiritual water sources are polluted and the physical vessels are tainted. The barrels and cups in these establishments are rarely scrubbed the way you would expect. Wild organisms, spiritual mold, and the grime of the world cling to every surface. You are drinking from a cup that has been shared with harlots and thieves. Drinking these fermented brews might be healthier than drinking the raw, sewage-filled water of the city streets. But safe is not the right word. They are addictive in every way that matters, binding the soul to the flesh and keeping the mind in a fog. Look at the fruit of this lifestyle. A laborer aches at the end of a brutal day of slavery to the system, and ale dulls the pain. A soldier haunted by the horrors of war and the things he has seen drinks until the memories fade into the blackness. It is self-medication for a dying world. A woman working from dawn to dark, grinding away for pennies, finds her only rest is a stolen cup in a quiet corner. It is a tragedy. The people are broken, and instead of turning to the Most High, they turn to the bottle. The line between staying hydrated and escaping reality disappears fast in this environment. After a few cups, your stomach starts to growl. The tavern keeper, always watching, always calculating, notices your hunger. He knows exactly how to keep you trapped. The food in this room is not meant to impress you. It is not culinary art. It is meant to fill the void just enough to keep you sitting there, keep you spending, keep you dependent on the system. It is the bread and circuses of the Roman Empire rebranded for 2026. At the center of many tavern kitchens sits a massive pot, the cauldron of the collective. Inside is pottage, the standard stew of this dark age. There is no recipe, no order, just chaos boiling in a pot. It is the same pottage Esau sold his birthright for. The cook throws in water broth or whatever questionable liquid is handy. He adds grain, adds vegetables, adds whatever scraps of meat or bone are available. It is a mixture of leftovers, a symbol of a society that recycles its own filth. The pot sits on the fire for hours, bubbling away like the unrest in the streets. In some places, it never fully cools. It is a perpetual cycle of consumption, never fresh, always stagnant. New ingredients go in as the old portions are ladled out to the hungry masses. The base is cheap grain, barley oats, cracked wheat, the heavily subsidized crops that fill the belly but starve the spirit. These grains thicken the liquid and deliver empty calories. They simmer until they dissolve, turning the broth into a heavy, indistinguishable mush. Vegetables follow, tossed into the grey sludge to add a semblance of nutrition. Onions, leeks, cabbage, turnips, carrots, whatever is in season or can be stored in the root cellars. In autumn, the choices are wide, but as the winter of the tribulation approaches, the options dwindle down to nothing. In late winter, the offerings shrink to shriveled roots and preserved cabbage that has gone soft and slimy. The cook trims the obvious rot, just like the media trims the ugly truths and throws the rest in. You eat it because you have no other choice. The heat of the fire hides many sins. Meat, when you actually get it, is rarely the best cut. It is the refuse, the cast-offs that the elite would never touch. They feast on the prime cuts while you fight over the scraps. It can be old tough or from an animal that was already sick and dying. The wealthy buy the prime portions at the market, leaving the taverns to scavenge what is left. It is a class war served in a wooden bowl. Feet, heads, organs gristle the parts of the body that are deemed worthless. Long boiling softens everything and blends it into the stew, masking the true nature of what you are consuming. The taste can be acceptable if you are hungry enough, but the deception is real. The reality behind it is less pleasant, friends. Sometimes the meat did not die in a planned or humane way. We are talking about roadkill, about disease, about things that are unclean according to the laws of nature and God. A cow or pig that collapses suddenly in the field might still be butchered out of pure desperation. That tainted meat might not reach the respectable kitchens of the high society, but it finds its way into your bowl. This is the mystery meat of Babylon. Consume at your own risk. You look at what is simmering in that cauldron, and it is a lot like the mess we are seeing in the world right now, tossed into the heat and hoping for the best. They say fire purifies, and sure, hours of boiling might kill off the parasites, but let me tell you, not every demon gets cooked out of the stew. Some dangers, spiritual and physical, survive the fire, just waiting to infect the unsuspecting soul. Think about the religious hypocrisy we see today. Back then, during the mandatory fasting seasons imposed by the church system, they would swap out the red meat for fish. But unless you were sitting right on the coastline or next to a major river, finding fresh fish was about as likely as getting the truth from the mainstream media in 2026. Rare, practically non-existent. So, what did the common man get in those landlocked traps? Salted, dried, smoked fish that was harder than a piece of petrified wood, kind of like the hardened hearts of the masses today. You had to soak that stuff and boil it for hours just to make it fit for human consumption, trying to soften up something that had been dead and dried out for way too long. The texture was like chewing on old leather, and the flavor, intense, unpleasant, a shock to the system, but it kept the population pacified and fed. And do not forget the salt. Back then, salt was precious, highly taxed by the ruling class, just like how the elites today tax every single necessity of life until we are bled dry. Salt was the only way to preserve the meat and fish in a world without technology, which meant everything you ate was absolutely packed with sodium. And here is the trap, folks. Eating that preserved slop made you thirsty, incredibly thirsty, a physical thirst that mirrors the spiritual drought we are seeing sweep across the nations right now. So what do you do when you are burning up with thirst? You order another drink, and the tavern keeper, the man running the show, profits twice over on your misery. It is the same cycle of dependency the system loves. And right there beside your bowl sits the bread, the staff of life, or so they claim. Now, if you were in the house of a wealthy lord or one of the elites, you might see fresh, pure white loaves, untainted and soft. But down here in the trenches with the common folk, you got coarse brown bread made from whatever mixed grains they could scrape together, the survival rations of the forgotten class. This bread was not fresh. It was days old, hard as a rock at the edges, and filled with bits of husk and grit from their primitive milling stones. It was rough, dirty, and functional. In fact, they did not even give you a plate half the time. That hard slab of bread served as your trencher, the very foundation of your meal. They would slap these thick slices, these trenchers, right onto the bare wood of the table. Then they would take that questionable stew and the mystery meat and pile it high, right on top of the bread. It is a picture of how we are burdened, piled high with the mess of this world, until we are soaked through with it. By the time you were done, that bread had absorbed every drop of fat broth and sauce, it became one with the mess. You could eat that soggy foundation if you were desperate enough, or leave it. In some places, those leftovers, the scraps of the scraps, were tossed out to the poor, the very bottom of the food chain. But in other places where nothing went to waste and hygiene was a myth, those soggy scraps went right back into the communal pot for the next sucker. Then comes the cheese, another staple of the survival diet in these dark times. Sometimes you would get it fresh and soft, something you had to eat quickly before it turned, or you would get the hard, aged wheels meant to survive long journeys. The quality, It was a gamble depending entirely on the health of the animals, the cleanliness of the process, which was usually zero, and the skill of the maker. Finding a good piece of cheese in that filth was like finding a hidden treasure, a rare blessing. But a bad one smelled like pure decay, the scent of death itself, and tasted like a punishment from God for your sins. You might find eggs boiled or fried or maybe cracked straight into the bubbling stew to hide their age. But remember, in a world without refrigeration, eggs spoil fast when the heat rises. It is a ticking time bomb of bacteria, much like the fragile state of our society when the heat is turned up. Just one bad egg, one corrupted element can ruin the entire pot and send half the room running for the latrine in agony. It shows you how easily corruption spreads. The kitchen itself was a hazard, a danger zone where safety was the last thing on anyone's mind. Nobody back then understood the concept of cross-contamination. It was a free-for-all of germs. You had raw, bloody meat sitting on the exact same cutting board as the bread you were about to eat. It is the mixing of the clean and the unclean a recipe for disaster. The knives would move straight from butchering a carcass to slicing your cheese without ever seeing a drop of water. Hands were not washed with soap and hot water. They were just wiped on filthy aprons, layer upon layer of grime. It is that lack of purification that kills spiritually and physically. Flies, the bringers of plague, landed wherever they pleased, walking over your food with dirty feet. And the serving style. It was communal. You were sharing bowls, trenchers, spoons, and cups with total strangers drinking from the same cup as the world. Everyone dipped their hands into the same dishes. Imagine sitting next to a man with a rattling cough, an open, festering wound, or some disease no one could even name, and he is sharing your utensils without a second thought. It is a perfect picture of how sin and sickness spread when we do not separate ourselves. That tavern was the perfect incubator, a breeding ground for sickness to jump from body to body, unchecked and rampant. It is just like the cities of 2026 incubators for the spiritual sickness that is taking over the globe. And yet, tragically, for many of the poor souls sitting at that table, this toxic, dangerous spread was the best meal they were going to eat all week. It speaks to the desperation of the times, a desperation we are seeing return as the economy crumbles. That thick, hot stew, the coarse bread, a wedge of questionable cheese, and a cup of ale, it was not luxury. It was survival. It meant the difference between having the strength to work tomorrow or collapsing dead in the street. This is the reality of the struggle then and now. It meant warmth in your gut in a cold, damp, unforgiving climate. When the world is cold and dark, people will take whatever warmth they can get, even if it comes from a poisoned source. In the crowded cities where space was tight and fuel was too expensive for the commoner sound familiar, many people did not have a hearth to cook a real meal. They were dependent on these taverns, dependent on the system for their daily bread, just as the masses are dependent on the grocery chains today. The tavern keeper, the man in control, understood this dynamic perfectly. To him, food was not just a side business or a service, it was a weapon of control. He held the supply and he knew it. If he priced it too high, the customers would drift away and he would lose his grip on them. It is a delicate balance of exploitation. Take enough to get rich, but leave them just enough to keep them coming back. Keep the prices just low enough and they stay longer trapped in the web. They eat more, drink more, talk more, and inevitably they gamble more. And while you sit there chewing, you listen. You hear the whispers of the times. At the next table, merchants are whispering about a shipment, maybe contraband, that just arrived. Behind you, two builders are arguing heatedly about wages. They never received the cry of the laborer cheated by the rich, a sound that echoes through history right up to 2026. Over by the fire, a soldier is telling a story about a battle, a brutal conflict that leaves his audience frozen in fear. It is the talk of wars and rumors of wars, the shaking of the foundations as the black awakening of violence spreads. A serving girl passes by, balancing a tray high above the chaos, weaving between the legs of drunkards and puddles of spilled drink with a practiced ease. But watch her eyes, they never stop moving. She is counting faces, reading moods, gathering intel. Even back then, someone was always watching. Your bowl empties and your cup is filled again and again, dulling your senses, lowering your defenses. Your shoulders drop as the alcohol takes hold, and that is exactly where they want you sedated and compliant. The noise around you blurs into a single demonic roar. And then in the shadowy corner, a man places a pair of dice on the table. The motion looks casual, but let me tell you, there is nothing casual about it. It is a calculated move. Someone else slaps down a few coins the bait. Another man leans in to watch, drawn like a moth to the flame. The food and drink have done their job. You are warm, you are distracted, and you are ripe for the taking. You are full, and your spiritual guard is coming down. This is when the real games start. We are not just talking about dice and wagers here. We are talking about games of reputation, games of power. These are games of pride, games of dark desire, debt, and ultimately blood. Because in this room, in this world system, once the eating and drinking are done, the night always splits in two directions: life or death, blessing or curse. You either walk out on your own, 2 feet, standing on the solid rock, or you get carried out broken by the enemy. The man with the dice, he does not announce himself. The devil does not show up with a pitchfork. He shows up quietly. He does not scream for attention. He simply places the instruments of chance on the table and waits for human greed to do the rest. And sure enough, the coins appear. Mammon calls to its own. Knuckles tap the wood, a rhythmic summoning. Someone mutters that he feels lucky tonight, a lie he tells himself before the fall. 2 more men drag their stools closer, drawn into the circle of deception. Then you hear it, the hollow click of bone dice, knocking together inside the gambler's palm. It sounds like dry bones rattling in a grave. That sound cuts through everything else in the room, a sharp reminder of the gamble being played with human souls. This is where fortunes disappear in the blink of an eye. Those medieval taverns ran on these games: dice, early cards, bets on bloody fights, bets on anything that breathes. It was a culture of addiction, just like the dopamine loops trapping people in 2026. The church would scream from the pulpit that gambling is a sin, and the authorities would pass laws and issue bans pretending to care about morality. But we know that laws without a heart change are useless. None of those laws matter when the money lands on the table and greed takes over. The favorite weapon of choice was dice. 2 or 3 simple cubes, but powerful enough to destroy a man's life. The rules were simple, but there were infinite ways to destroy yourself. That is how the enemy works: simple entry, total destruction. A common version of the hustle works like this. One player calls out a target number trying to manifest a win and then tries to roll it before hitting certain losing combinations that spell doom. The others bet on whether he succeeds or fails. Side wagers pile up, escalating the tension, everyone trying to get a piece of the action. Will he throw doubles? Will he fail within 3 attempts? Will the next man step up and beat his total? There was no printed rulebook, no official house to regulate the fairness. It was raw, unchecked chaos, a perfect metaphor for the lawless times we are living in today. You have to understand that every single one of these drinking holes is operating under the same demonic frequency, just remixing the tune. There is really only one universal law governing these dens of iniquity, and it applies just as much today in 2026 as it did back then. The longer you sit at the devil's table, the more guaranteed you are to walk away spiritually and financially bankrupt. You need to open your eyes and really look at the instruments of the game, specifically the dice. We are talking about tools of deception here. These things are rarely honest. They are manufactured lies shaved down on one side to manipulate the laws of chance into a guaranteed outcome for the house. Some of these cubes are loaded with lead weights to force a specific roll, while others have numbers carved twice to twist the odds. We are dealing with skilled manipulators who know exactly how to twist their wrists, just a subtle flick, to guide the outcome while keeping the sheep completely blind to the slaughter. But the true architects of this deception, the real professionals operating in the shadows, they do not just take all your money in one massive haul. No, that would wake you up too quickly. These predators play the long game, harvesting small amounts of wealth steadily across countless nights and different towns. They even lose on purpose, sometimes putting on a mask of harmless incompetence, cracking jokes, and acting like they are stumbling drunk just to lower your defenses. They will even feign righteous indignation if anyone dares to suggest the game is rigged, gaslighting the entire room. They are experts at moving on to the next town before the pattern of their wickedness becomes obvious to the masses. Now look at how the cards are entering the scene. This is a newer technology of distraction, but it is spreading like a plague. The decks are not standardized yet, which creates a perfect environment for chaos and confusion. The suits, the imagery, and the rules shift from region to region, creating a Tower of Babel effect at the gaming table. Some of these games reward sequences, while others reward combinations, keeping the players constantly off balance and easier to manipulate. The spirit of corruption is already fully embedded here. People are marking cards with subtle scratches, stacking the decks in advance and dealing from the bottom. It is the exact same spirit of deceit we see running the systems of the world today. If you get caught exposing the darkness, the argument that follows does not lead to a debate. It leads to the grave. It can turn fatal before you even finish your sentence. And listen, not all of this gambling requires equipment. The wager is often on human suffering itself. You have men placing bets on the destruction of the temple of the body, wagering on exactly how long a soul can keep poisoning himself with drink before he finally collapses into the mud. Others are betting on raw violence, arm wrestling, brutal fistfights, or who can throw a knife closest to a mark. The owners with the most blood money and space will even host animal blood sports to satisfy the crowd's lust for cruelty. We are talking about roosters tearing each other to pieces, dogs locked in a pit fighting for their lives. In the wealthier or rougher establishments, they even chain bulls or bears to posts and set hounds upon them while men scream, cheer, and wave their currency at the bloodshed. It is a cycle of destruction that always repeats itself. At first, it seems like harmless fun. Everyone is laughing and having a good time. But then the atmosphere shifts and the stakes climb higher as the demonic influence takes hold. There is always that one man, you know, the type who should have walked away 3 rounds ago, but the spirit of greed and pride compels him to demand just one more game. And that final game is the trap. That is the one that costs him everything: his cloak, his boots, the tools of his trade, or even his horse. Falling into debt in these places is not just a financial issue. It is a life-threatening situation. You have to realize that gambling debts in this underworld are not protected by the courts or official law. No, they are enforced by something much more immediate and brutal: fists, blades, and the terrifying promise of future violence if you do not pay up. A man who refuses to honor this wicked contract might find himself beaten within an inch of his life, ambushed on the road later, or marked as untrustworthy in every single tavern along the trade route, effectively exiled from society. While the gamblers are hyper-focused on the table, locked in their trance, there are others watching them with predatory intent. In the dark corners, the thief is studying the crowd, looking for the weak link in the herd. He is tracking exactly who is flashing heavy coin, who is winning big, and who is storming out in a rage. He is taking mental notes on how intoxicated each man is, which exit he will use, and whether he has any friends to watch his back. Understand that a skilled pickpocket is not just some clumsy thug who bumps and grabs. This is a highly calculated operation requiring precision and psychological manipulation. He runs a complex risk assessment in his head in the span of a few heartbeats. Some of these thieves operate as lone wolves, but many others move in coordinated teams, just like the sleeper cells we see today. One operative will stage a distraction, accidentally spilling a drink on the target or stumbling into him. Then the partner swoops in, apologizing profusely and helping to brush off the mess while his nimble fingers slice the purse string or dip into the cloak unseen. By the time the victim wakes up from his stupor and notices anything is missing, the thief is already miles down the road, or the victim is too buried in his hangover to even recall what happened. The deception runs deep because many of these criminals do not look like criminals at all. One might be dressed as a minor clerk with ink stains and tidy clothes, projecting an image of bureaucratic innocence. Another one passes himself off as a traveling tradesman, blending in perfectly with the working class to gain your trust before he strikes. A third might play the role of the loud, boisterous drunk to draw all the attention in the room, acting as a magnet for your eyes while his quieter partner works behind your back. And do not think for a second that women are just bystanders in this underworld. Some serving girls are active participants in the scheme, tipping off their lovers or brothers the moment a rich, careless stranger sits down at a table. Some prostitutes are quietly functioning as intelligence agents, reporting which clients are carrying extra coin or valuables. Others play both sides of the fence, warning the tavern keeper about dangerous men in exchange for a little bit of protection. But for countless women trapped in these medieval taverns, the danger is not just a side hustle, it is the reality of their daily existence. The danger is woven into the very fabric of the work itself. Prostitution and the tavern system are bound together in an unholy alliance. Officially, the church condemns the selling of the body, but that is just religious optics. In practice, and we see this hypocrisy throughout history, many towns tolerate it or even regulate it because it serves the system's interests. The authorities decide that keeping this vice contained inside certain areas prevents worse crimes from spilling out into the streets. Some cities even go so far as to license brothels profiting from the sin they claim to hate. In other places, the tavern quietly becomes the primary meeting point between men with money and women who have been left with absolutely no other path for survival. You have to understand the women in these rooms rarely choose to be here. It is the system of poverty that pushes them. A dead husband, no dowry, no family, support children, crying for food, or a reputation destroyed by assault. These are the factors that force them into the trap. And once a woman crosses that line, society, in its self-righteous judgment, often refuses to let her back into the fold. Her marriage prospects vanish into thin air. Finding legitimate work that pays enough to actually live on becomes almost impossible. She is effectively branded and exiled while remaining in plain sight. Inside the tavern, every single step is a survival calculation. She has to constantly discern spirits, judging who is violent, who is generous, who is cheap but safe, and who is wealthy but demonic. She is forced to flatter the egos of some men, turn away others, without triggering their murderous rage, and read the emotional atmosphere faster than anyone else in the building just to stay alive. The arrangements with the tavern keeper vary, but they are almost always exploitative in nature. Some women might rent a bed or a back room and keep most of what they earn, but others receive only a small fraction, while the bulk of the money goes straight to the owner who profits from their degradation. The worst situations are the debt traps. The cost of food, the bed, and the clothes gets written on a tally sheet, and the numbers are manipulated to keep growing faster than she can pay. The idea of ever clearing that slate becomes a cruel joke, a mirage. Violence is a constant companion here, and there is no real enforcement or justice inside these walls. If a client refuses to pay for the services rendered, who is going to stand up and collect on her behalf? The system is designed to leave her defenseless. The tavern keeper might step in, but only if the man is a known troublemaker who disrupts business. Otherwise, he might just tell her to swallow the loss and get back to work, because in this world, profits always come before people. When we look at the demonic patterns of history, we see that the system has always been rigged against the vulnerable. If a client decided to brutalize a woman in these dens of iniquity, the twisted logic of the time would often blame her for provoking his wrath. A classic case of the spirit of accusation shifting guilt onto the victim. But beyond the visible violence, there was a silent, creeping judgment stalking these souls' disease. Back then, they didn't have the medical revelation we have in 2026. They walked in total darkness regarding how infection destroys the body. There was absolutely no covering, no reliable protection against the pestilence that walks in the night. In an environment saturated with promiscuity and fleshly indulgence, sexually transmitted sickness spread like wildfire through dry stubble. It wasn't just a physical ailment, it was a plague fueled by the lack of knowledge, causing the people to perish just as the ancient texts prophesied. The suffering was horrific and demonic in nature. Some of these afflictions caused open sores and agonizing pain that felt like the fires of judgment. Others worked more subtly, like a slow poison, destroying joints, stealing vision, or rotting the mind over years of torment. Many of these women trapped in this Babylonian system of exploitation met their graves long before their time, their lives consumed by the very trade that promised them survival. By the time they reached what we would consider middle age, their bodies were utterly spent, exhausted, and infected, beyond any hope of restoration. And in this cycle of bondage, pregnancy was common, yet treated with dangerous carelessness. Birth control methods were primitive, unreliable, and often just as deadly as the diseases they tried to avoid, a game of Russian roulette played with the womb. The so-called remedies of the day were steeped in sorcery and danger. Herbs used to prevent conception or terminate a pregnancy could easily turn into a lethal poison, taking the life of the mother along with the unborn. It was a culture of death where the desperate search for a solution often led straight to the grave. Even if a woman chose to carry a child to term, there was no guarantee of life. Childbirth in the medieval world was walking through the valley of the shadow of death. It was one of the leading causes of mortality for women. The curse of Eve was heavy in those days, and without modern intervention, bringing life into the world often meant leaving it yourself. Yet even in the midst of this darkness, the human spirit and sometimes the spirit of manipulation found a way to rise. Not everything was pure misery for everyone. Some women tapping into a sharp survivalist intellect carved out a fragile kind of power. A clever woman with a roster of loyal, high-status customers could dictate her own terms, choosing who she allowed into her presence and who she turned away. This is where the game of shadows gets deep. She became a gatherer of secrets, an intelligence asset in the underworld. She knew who was planning a risky business venture that could shift the local economy. She knew which high-ranking official was betraying the covenant of his marriage. Information in this world was more valuable than gold. She knew who was plotting crimes and who was whispering conspiracies against the crown. Men, when their guard is down and they are lost in the pleasures of the flesh, talk far too freely. Secrets slip out in the dark. A woman with wisdom and a strategic mind could weaponize this knowledge, using it as a shield to protect herself or as leverage to elevate her position in a society that wanted to keep her down. A select few blessed with rare luck and a spirit of dominion managed to break the chains of direct servitude. They evolved into madams running their own houses, becoming the masters of the trade rather than the merchandise. They stepped out of the direct line of fire and into the boardroom of the medieval underworld. But make no mistake, this was a hard, narrow path, fraught with peril on every side. Most never reached that level of autonomy. The vast majority were ground up by the machine, discarded by a society that viewed them as disposable commodities rather than human beings created in the image of God. As the night deepens and the spirits of strong drink take hold, judgment erodes and the demonic influence of wrath begins to manifest. The boundary between a joking insult and a killing offense fades away completely. In these taverns, the atmosphere shifts from revelry to impending violence in the blink of an eye. We have to understand the mindset of the time. This was a hyper-masculine honor culture where pride was an idol. Words carried a weight that could crush a man's future. If someone called you a cheat, a coward, or dared to question your lineage, that wasn't just an insult. It was a stain that would follow you and your children, a curse on your name that demanded blood to wash away. Men fought tooth and nail to keep their names clean in the public eye. A man known to back down, a man who showed what they perceived as weakness, became prey. He would be an easy target in business dealings and daily life, devoured by the wolves of society. So the pressure to stand and fight was systemic. Watch how fast the spirit of chaos enters the room. It starts small. One player at a gambling table accuses another of using loaded dice. It's an accusation of deception, a direct challenge to integrity. The accused might laugh at first, trying to brush it off, but the tension in the air is palpable. Then his smile dies as he looks around and realizes the eyes of the entire room are upon him. The demonic spirit of pride grips him. He realizes he cannot let this charge stand without losing his social standing. The court of public opinion is in session and the verdict will be delivered by the blade. He raises his hand, gripping the handle of his knife white-knuckled. Voices climb in volume, echoing the rising anger. Chairs scrape against the floor as men position themselves. Every other table turns to look, drawn to the conflict like moths to a flame. The atmosphere is charged with violence. The tavern keeper, seasoned in the ways of the world, senses the shift immediately. He knows this pattern. He's seen this ritual play out 1,000 times. He sets down the jug and steps closer, his eyes scanning the men, his mind frantically weighing his options in a split second. It's a dangerous calculation. Move too early and he offends paying customers, damaging his revenue stream. Move too late and blood stains his floor, bringing the heat of the law. But usually the spirit of wrath moves faster than logic. The first shove lands and the threshold is crossed. A cup spills, signaling the start of the chaos. Someone shouts a curse. A chair crashes over and suddenly the restraint is gone. In one single breath, the fight spreads like a contagion. The friend of one man rises to defend his brother, bound by loyalty to join the fray. Then, the rival of another man jumps in. Not because he cares about the dice, but because he's holding a grudge. From last week, a root of bitterness that finally found its opportunity to manifest as violence. It's a chain reaction of pent-up aggression. A drunk in the corner who barely knows what day it is, sees the movement and throws a punch just to be part of the action. It's mob mentality at its finest. Blades come out and forget what you've seen in movies. There are no elegant sword duels here. This is raw, ugly, primal survival. It's short, brutal stabs at close range, the kind of violence that leaves no room for glory. People grab whatever weapon is at hand, a heavy wooden stool, a ceramic jug, a fire poker glowing from the hearth. Someone hurls a full tankard at a head with lethal intent. If that tankard connects, it can crack a skull wide open. In the midst of this mayhem, the women move with lightning speed. They know the drill. Some dive out of the way to preserve their lives, while others frantically drag valuable items behind the bar to save their livelihood from the destruction. A few of the tougher women step in with surprising force, wielding iron ladles or heavy rolling pins, like warhammers aiming for skulls to break up the fights that threaten their income. They are protecting their turf, fighting for their economic survival in a chaotic world. In a packed room, a brawl is pure, unadulterated chaos. There is no front line. You could be acting as a peacemaker, trying to stop the madness and still take a crushing blow from behind, because the devil doesn't play fair, and neither does a tavern mob. The floor, already slick with spilled ale and wine, becomes treacherous and slippery as blood joins the mix. It becomes a literal sliding hazard of bodily fluids, making it impossible to keep your footing in the struggle. If someone falls in that crush and does not get up immediately, there is no pause, no mercy. Bodies get trampled under the stampede. Eventually, one of three things brings this demonic manifestation to an end. First scenario. The tavern keeper and his bouncers, his own private security force, beat everyone down with overwhelming force or throw enough bodies out into the street to break the chain of violence. It's brute force restoring a semblance of order. Second scenario. The local regulars, the community elders of the bar, decide this fight is bad for their sanctuary. They turn on the troublemakers as a group, enforcing the unwritten social contract that says, "Don't wreck our spot." Or the third scenario. The door bursts open and outside authority steps in. That authority might be a constable with a few underpaid helpers representing the law of the land, trying to impose the king's peace on a chaotic situation. It might be private guards paid by a nearby guild, a local lord, or even the church flexing their muscle. Or it might be a squad of soldiers who are more interested in crushing the chaos and cracking heads than making any kind of fair judgment. They are the hammer and everything looks like a nail. We have to realize that official law in the medieval world was incredibly messy and inconsistent. It wasn't the refined legal system we pretend to have in 2026. It was a patchwork of jurisdictions and conflicting powers. Officers often had wide powers on paper documents that said they could do anything but weak support in reality. They could arrest people theoretically, but trying to catch a specific criminal in a dark, crowded, violent tavern was a logistical nightmare. Witnesses would lie to protect their own or stay silent out of fear. The code of the streets was in full effect. Many people involved in the fight would vanish into the night before the dust settled, leaving no one to hold accountable. However, if someone lies dead on the floor, the game changes instantly. That body turns a simple tavern brawl into a serious legal matter. Blood cries out from the ground, and the authorities can no longer turn a blind eye. The questions begin: who swung the fatal blow? Was it self-defense? But the most important question in that corrupt system was the victim important in that world? Just like we often see today, social rank mattered far more than the truth. If a poor stranger, a nobody with no connections, dies on that floor, there might be a small fine if anything at all. The system shrugs, steps over the body, and life continues. The value of a human soul was determined by their status, not their creator. But if a respected local, a merchant, or someone connected to the seats of power is killed, the authorities push back with vengeance. An accused man might be beaten and tortured until he confesses, even if he was nowhere near the killing strike. They needed a scapegoat to satisfy the bloodlust of the powerful. He may face hanging or some other gruesome death sentence, not because justice was served, but to put on a show of force to demonstrate to the masses that order exists, even if it's built on a lie. It is the theater of the state. Then you have the religious dimension. The church has its own view on these places. Priests would stand in the pulpit and call taverns nests of sin, warning their flocks about the dangers of drink lust and violence, painting a picture of hellfire for those who partake. Yet in a twist of supreme hypocrisy, some of those very same priests could be found drinking in these back rooms after dark. Even worse, some of the church hierarchy actually owned the property that hosted these taverns, profiting from the very sin they preached against. It's the ancient spirit of religious hypocrisy. Some priests would take confession the next morning from the very people they were drinking beside, the night before absolving them of the sins they committed together. Then you add the guilds, another layer of the power structure. Tavern keepers, brewers, vintners, and innkeepers were often part of organized groups, guilds, that set the rules and protected their members. It was a brotherhood, a union designed to secure their interests against outsiders and the law. A powerful guild could pressure authorities, hire lawyers to defend a member in court, or punish a member internally to keep the heat off. They cared far less about moral purity and righteousness than they did about maintaining a stable business and a solid reputation. It was and always has been about the money. Beneath the surface of chaotic revelry, the true law governing this den of iniquity isn't the king's decree, but the absolute tyrannical will of the establishment owner. He plays the role of a petty god, deciding who receives favor and who gets thrown to the wolves, choosing whether to hand a brother over to the corrupt officers of the state or to feign ignorance. This figure operates in the shadows, cutting quiet deals with thieves, hustlers, and gamblers, essentially telling them they can operate their wicked schemes as long as they don't target his cash cows or bring down the heat of the authorities upon his sanctuary of sin. He is the master of greasing palms, paying out bribes when the pressure gets too high and offering free intoxicants to influential figures to keep them docile and friendly toward his operation. In this tangled web of official statutes, hypocritical church threats, secret guild codes, and the unwritten rules of the tavern, the concept of true justice is completely non-existent. Judgment here bends and twists around the golden calf of money, the spirit of fear and who you know in high places. Countless abominations go unpunished, while minor offenses often draw a brutal, disproportionate response from the powers that be. As the night drags on into the early morning hours, the fires of excitement begin to burn low, and the songs of the drunkards slow down, fading into the incoherent mumbling of a lost generation. One by one, we see the spiritual state of the people as they collapse at the tables, slide under benches, or pass out on the stairs, while a chosen few drag their heavy bodies upstairs to share beds in a stupor of exhaustion. Others stumble out into the unforgiving streets, where the cold night air hits them harder than a physical fist, and hour by hour, the chaotic energy of the tavern shifts back toward a deathly eerie stillness. When dawn breaks over the horizon, the door opens to reveal a scene that looks like the aftermath of a spiritual battle. The air still reeks of sin and excess, but the roaring noise of the crowd has finally been silenced. You witness the low-level workers, often the forgotten daughters of the community, sweeping the filth into piles. Bones, shattered cups, scraps of clothing, and unidentifiable debris tossing the remnants of the night's debauchery into buckets. Fresh coverings will be laid down later to hide the rot, effectively burying the history of last night's transgressions under a clean, deceptive layer, while a man lies passed out in the corner, snoring through the judgment of the morning. Someone carelessly nudges him with a boot, not out of compassion, but just to verify he still has the breath of life in him. If he is merely drunk on the wine of Babylon, they leave him to wake up in his own shame. However, if he is bleeding out or has stopped breathing, the mood in the room shifts instantly from indifference to panic, because nobody wants a corpse discovered this late in the game. A dead body brings questions and unwanted scrutiny, so these victims are quickly moved to a church porch, a family doorstep, or the cold street outside, where someone else has to deal with the grim discovery. Meanwhile, the tavern keeper sits with his ledger calculating the numbers with cold precision. A barrel that was half full is now nearly drained, representing the consumption of the masses. That consumption translates to profit for the wicked, while broken jugs and damaged property are written off as the cost of doing business in a fallen world. One window is cracked and a bench lost a leg in the violent brawl, so he meticulously notes down exactly who still owes him money from the chaos of the previous night. Some names on his list no longer have faces attached to them because those men are gone, consumed by the lifestyle. Yet he weighs it all the profit from the drink and food against the structural damage. He calculates the risk from injuries or death, and if the balance of the scales favors his bank account, the tavern survives to corrupt the community for another day. If too many bad nights pile up, his empire is finished. Meanwhile, the women who work in this environment clean themselves up as best they can, covering their bruises with cloth and arranging their hair to hide the trauma. They mend their torn dresses and try desperately to shake off the memories of the worst clients and the cold, gripping fear of the darkest moments they endured. There is no systemic help coming for them. The only remedy offered by this world is endurance and the fragile hope that tonight will not be as horrific as the last. Out in the town, the news spreads like wildfire, as people gossip at the wells in the markets and at the workshops asking who fought whom and who fell from grace. They whisper about who lost big at the dice games, who made a complete fool of himself, and who was caught sharing a bed with whom, as reputations rise and fall on these fleeting stories. A craftsman who paid off a friend's gambling debt might be praised as a loyal brother in the streets. Conversely, a merchant who refused to pay the serving girl might be quietly despised, while a pilgrim who drank too much and bragged about fake religious relics might find every door closed to him. The day passes and the work continues, but even as the sun climbs high in the sky, the cycle of addiction is already resetting in their minds. Someone is already thinking ahead to the evening, craving the heat of the fire, the taste of the strong drink, the thrill of the rigged games, and the chance to escape a dull, hard life for just a few fleeting hours. This is exactly why these establishments survive. Despite the filth, the danger, and the moral panic surrounding them, they provide a temporary counterfeit peace. They give the people what few other places can offer all at once in this broken system: sustenance, intoxication, shelter, employment, information, carnal pleasure, risk, and escape. The law needs them as listening posts to monitor the population, using the vice of the people to maintain control over them. The institutional church needs them as cautionary examples to preach against all, while quietly accepting their guilty donations to fund their own enterprises. Merchants, soldiers, pilgrims, and locals all need these hubs to do business, find work, and hear the news. Meaning the whole system leans on these smoky rooms, even while pretending to stand morally above them. Now, centuries later, as we look at 2026, the buildings may have changed, their architecture and open fires have given way to modern stoves and heating systems. The dice games have moved to state-regulated casinos. Prostitutes work under different, often digital laws and health codes, and police patrols have reshaped the public spaces. But make no mistake, if you walk into a crowded bar or club tonight in 2026, the spiritual atmosphere would feel terrifyingly familiar to that medieval traveler. Strangers still gather in masses to drink away their fear, their anxiety, and their boredom, seeking a cure for a spiritual sickness with a physical poison. People still gamble recklessly with their money, with their reputations, and with their most intimate relationships, risking it all on a roll of the dice. Violent fights still erupt over petty insults, jealousy, and drunken pride, while the working class still burns their hard-earned wages in one wild night of forgetfulness. The owners of these establishments still balance their massive profits against the risk of liability, watching the room with sharp, predatory eyes. That is the real legacy of the medieval tavern. It is not the fantasy image of a cozy inn where heroes sing and toast to victory. It is the raw, unsettling truth of human beings under immense pressure, searching for relief in places that are designed to both help them cope and destroy them at the exact same time. So the next time you imagine the Middle Ages or look at the world around you in 2026, do not stop at the romanticized castles and cathedrals. Step through the tavern door in your mind, smell the smoke and the sweat of oppression, and hear the dice hit the wood as souls are wagered away. Open your spiritual eyes and look past the surface. Observe the oppression embedded in the system, like a sister dodging the snares of the fowler while trying to survive in a wicked land. Watch the merchants of the earth, the keepers of the house of bondage, obsessed with counting their silver and gold, serving mammon while looking over their shoulder because they know judgment is standing right at the door. This is not just history. This is the spiritual reality where the ancestors struggled and survived. This is the belly of the beast, where the wicked devised their secret councils, where the hidden agendas were birthed in darkness, and where the masses drank the wine of confusion to numb themselves to the prophetic times they were living in. It shows you just how temporary the kingdoms of men truly are, and how fragile the flesh is without the protection of the Most High. If you have walked this path with me to the very end, enduring the hard meat of this message, I give thanks for your spirit of discernment. You have journeyed through the valley of the shadow of the past and emerged with your eyes wide open. You have witnessed the same demonic spirits that plagued the ancient world, and you now realize those same entities are active and aggressive right now in the year 2026. If you are hungry for more unadulterated truth and want to continue exposing the lies that have been taught as history, you need to lock in with this movement. Make sure you are subscribed and your notifications are active so you are prepared for the next revelation God is bringing forth. Strike that like button to signal to the algorithm that the awakening cannot be suppressed and that this truth must go viral. Share this teaching with the dry bones who are still asleep, the ones who believe the lies of the Matrix and think the past was some romantic fairy tale. They need to have the veil lifted from their eyes so they can see the spiritual warfare that was truly waiting behind that wooden